I recently made a video about me struggling to find employment in the software engineering industry. This video was mostly targeted at developers who have at least a bit of experience in the industry, and I even started the whole video with a cloud engineering joke. However, I got one comment by someone who is currently studying for a degree in software engineering, and they confessed to me their desire to drop out. Generally, I avoid counseling people younger than me, as I fear my advice would make their life worse, or even just worsen their outlook on life. With that in mind, here's some advice for impressionable youngsters. Nestor is not liable for the viewer ending up sad, poor, unemployed, homeless, in the gutter, in prison, dead, sick, dismembered, cast out by society, or otherwise maligned before, during, or after the delivery of his shoddy advice, which he formed after years of a jaded, bitter existence. If you've been told you're good at computers, or if you're in high school and you code a bit, or even if you're in college halfway through a computer science degree, I want you to internalize at least some of the information in this video so you can determine whether software engineering is the right career for you. This video will not include any advice based on current market trends. Tech is one of, if not the most rapidly shifting industry you could join. If I concern myself with the current market, the advice in this video could become outdated between me starting this video and uploading it, never mind someone deciding to go to uni for a computing science degree and finishing it. I wanted to make this video because, having joined the industry, knowing this is what I wanted to do since I was about 14, I feel like nobody ever told me what the actual work of a software developer involves, not the interview process, not the day-to-day, and not what you're expected to do outside your 9 to 5. I will also include a section on whether you should go to university, because recommending that kids don't has been in vogue for a few years now. Section 1. Interview process. A typical software development candidacy procedure takes 4 to 5 hours all told. My experience has included a minimum of 3 hours, and I have been given take-home projects that took 10 days to complete. On one occasion, I was offered a 2-week paid trial. This isn't normal. Outside of software development, candidates revolt when they are interviewed for more than 2 hours. I have never participated in nor heard of a tech candidacy process that took less than 3 hours all told. Now you might ask, what in the Sigma are they doing with such a long interview process? Essentially, employers want you to prove to them that you can write production grade software. Production grade means any software that can be sold without the seller getting sued or interacts with components that face the internet. Tech recruiters claim to be democratizing access to tech jobs by devaluing degrees, and that degrees in computer science don't necessarily mean that the graduate is a good coder. There are 3 different types of tests you'll face: automated tests, supervised tests, and take-home projects. An automated test is typically done through a platform like HackerRank or LeetCode. You are sent a link to one of these platforms, typically as the first stage of the interview process, or right after you have a short conversation with the recruiter. The testing platform gives you a time limit and 1 or more coding tests that you have to solve in that time. The time limit can be very tight. So tight, in fact, that being a slow typist will disadvantage you. The tests you are given are strict. External libraries or components are almost always disallowed. You might be prescribed a specific programming language, one that might have inherent disadvantages relating to the tasks you are given. There are strict correctness requirements, so if you can't find a workable solution that outputs the exact result expected by the testing platform, that question will be marked as a complete failure even if you get very close to the answer. Some platforms even limit algorithmic complexity, and they all have a hard limit on execution time for practical reasons. Counterintuitively, the code you write for these tests has to be as close to production grade as possible, but applying common production practices like hardening, error management, logging, and properly named tokens will run down the clock faster than you can say Fortnite Riz. Another thing worth noting is the specific nature of the tasks given to you during the test. The vast majority of test questions for automated tests aren't real-world examples of code, but exercises in lateral thinking and algorithmic knowledge. There's myriads of examples of extremely good coders who are stuck in jobs for 10+ years because they got into the market and got their last job before the vast proliferation of automated code tests. They never learned how to solve the tests because they didn't need to. These tests are supposed to filter out bad coders who fake their way into the industry, but they seriously hamper great veteran coders. Now, a small sidebar about LeetCode. LeetCode is something you're going to see referenced a lot when it's time for you to research tech interview techniques. LeetCode is a platform for automated test practice that also has functionality for employer tests. There's a dozen imitators trying to take their lunch because it's not that hard to make one of these platforms. LeetCode is only useful up to a certain point, and then you get diminishing returns. To succeed in tech interviews, you should know your basics like tree traversal, graph traversal, universal, and even some backtracing. If you get to the point where you can name strategies for solving lead code exercises, you are no longer training for job tests, you are now training for lead code itself. Employers are put off by lead code experts at the very least because they themselves aren't. Employers are looking for productive coders, not hyper-competitive ones, so if you're too proficient at testing, you can give off a bad vibe. Automated tests are considered by many to be impersonal and overly strict, so frequently you'll get a directly supervised test. A directly supervised test involves you jumping into a Zoom call with one or two engineers from the team that you're trying to join. You'll be given a coding task that you must solve while live explaining your solution. Essentially, you have to type code while vocalizing your thought process while one or more people are staring you down. If that sounds awful, that's because it is. If you have an anxiety disorder like me, you'll come to hate this type of coding test with a burning passion. Ostensibly, this is done to evaluate how you think as opposed to the correctness of your solution. The people interviewing you may help you get unstuck, but my experience is that they are very hands-off even if they claim otherwise. In reality, the people interviewing you designed the problem, don't have the experience of being faced with that same problem without them knowing the solution beforehand, and will absolutely judge you for not getting it right. There is much more leeway than in automated testing, given that the impression you give isn't directly tied to whether your code works, but that's not a high bar to pass. Last but not least, you've got take-home tests. For many reasons, automated tests only evaluate your ability to pass an automated test and not your coding skill. On the other hand, a supervised test requires an employer to spare a couple of their engineers for at least an hour per candidate. Enter take-home projects. These are full projects that you're expected to complete on your own time. For nearly every take-home, there will be a deadline and a prescribed time limit. In practice, the latter is theoretical. Between two equal engineers, the one that can dedicate more time will produce a better result. How does the employer know that someone spent too much time on the project? They don't. In effect, take-homes become a test of who can dedicate the most time. None of these testing methodologies are perfect, so most employers task every candidate with at least two. This is why so many tech candidacy processes end up taking 5 hours or more. You might assume every candidacy process uses automated testing for quick filtering of candidates and then one of the two others. I have been tested under supervision and given a take-home project by an employer in that order. Testing isn't the only thing that goes on during an interview. Add in at least one high-level engineer conversation and a quick chat with a recruiter between every stage, and that's how you end up with processes taking 8 hours of strict engagement, or much more if there's a take-home. Employers claim they do this because they think computer science degrees don't reflect a real-world ability to code. Second-hand anecdotes about computer science degree holders who couldn't code out of a wet paper bag are a dime a dozen. In fact, theoretical scientists will be the ones that are most able to reason their way through the complex algorithmic questions that show up in tests, and can talk your ear off about programming patterns and system architectures. They might not be able to mention specific frameworks and libraries, but asking about those is considered unfair. Interviewers are also not supposed to ask gotcha questions about language specifics, but one man's gotcha is another man's filter question. A filter question is one that you must get right to advance in the interview process. Things are like this because of Google. Around 2008, Google started becoming a really big deal. They wanted to become the biggest deal in the world, and the means to that end for them was testing the prospective employee's intelligence. This was irregular and unprecedented. Candidacies used to hinge on degrees, recommendation letters, and verifiable past experience. Now someone will skim your CV and send you a link to a test. Because this practice started one of the biggest success stories in tech, companies that didn't test their candidates started feeling left behind. Essentially, tech companies test to feel like a bigger deal than they actually are. The harder the test, the more exclusive it feels to get into the company, the more desirable it is to get in. You might think that's connected to the pay on offer. I have interviewed for more than 4 hours for positions in international tech companies that paid what would be considered in America to be less than minimum wage. Ideally, when it's time for you to get into the industry, you will land a few candidacy processes at the same time. If you have 3 every week, each taking up 5 hours, you'll be doing 15 hours of work in a single week. 15 hours is a part-time job. One company engaging you for 15 hours and not compensating you is immoral and in many places illegal. 3 companies doing the same under the pretense of interviews is considered a-okay. In general, not just in tech, you should know that the threshold for work is not producing profit for a company, it's them requesting and receiving a time commitment. Whether you're being productive during that time is a different concern. They should be paying you even if you choose to slack off and get yourself fired, or even if they can't find anything productive for you to do. Section 2, 9 to 5. Say you go through all that and manage to get hired. Congratulations, you have joined one of the weirdest and most mentally taxing professions in existence. existence. The vast majority, if not all of the projects you interact with until the end of uni will be the ones you've started from scratch, either alone or in collaboration with others. You will be familiar with every facet of such a project, allowing you to jump in and just write code on a whim. Once you get hired, that will change completely. Production code bases are massive, with deeply intertwining patterns, components that only specific departments are allowed to modify, and massive insurmountable mountains of legacy code. Software is considered legacy when nobody has had to interact with it for so long that knowledge of its operational logic has been lost to time. The Game of Thrones novels are about 350,000 words apiece. It is not uncommon to see production code bases that are a million lines long. The core of Linux, the most popular server operating system in the world, comprises of more than 30 million lines of code. It is impossible for me to convey to you just how complex production-grade software is unless you already know how to code and have had to write changes for said software. If you do already know how to code, look up open source projects in your favorite language on GitHub, click on a source file, find a random function, and try to figure out what it does. You will be more lost than Madeleine McCann, and that is to be expected. This feeling will never change, not after you get done with high school, not after you graduate uni, not after you get many years of experience in the industry, not even after you retire, and definitely not after you die. Production code is meant to be functional over being readable. The latter is important, but always an afterthought. Most reasonable workplaces won't expect you to produce a single meaningful contribution for the first couple weeks of your employment. An open source project is a software component that makes its uncompiled code available to the general public and often allows code submissions from random people. You will never be expected to figure out what production code can do in an instant. Professional software engineering work is dominated by reading and understanding code, which is a stark difference to what you'll be doing up until you graduate from uni. You will be reading tickets to see what needs to be done, reading architectural diagrams to see which components will be affected, reading search results on a code versioning platform to find the parts of each code base that need changing, reading the code to see how you can adapt it for the change, writing a few lines of code to implement the change, then reading documentation for how to run tests, reading the notes on your change from your superiors, then finally reading documentation on how to release your change. Writing will be a very small part of your job. Not writing code, but writing. Writing code is in turn a very small part compared to your total writing overall. A run-of-the-mill corporate software engineer writes only a few lines of code every day, but a lot of direct messages, emails, documentation, comments on tickets, release notes, and feedback on changes put in by your colleagues. This is the kind of admin work that doesn't show up in amateur and academic projects, but is imperative in corporate software. I've never been one of those people who thinks coders make for good writers and vice versa, but I do believe that coders have to be decent writers because they will be tasked with writing things other than code constantly. Subsection 2a. Learning. Speaking of constant, let's talk about on-the-job learning. The continuous learning process is the biggest difference between software engineering and any other profession. Most professions, you go through your main skill training, some on-the-job hands-on learning, and the rest of your career is focused on skill refinement. In software development, you learn basic coding, algorithmics, and general computing science concepts at uni. You then learn practices relating to production-grade software at your first job, and then you never stop learning. The most interesting bits of software development that took over the world were only invented recently. The TikTok recommendation algorithm, give or take 6 years ago. Facebook's Cassandra, 2008. Software development is the fastest evolving profession of all time, which many people find alluring, but that also comes with unique continuous learning requirements. As a software developer, you're constantly expected to learn new frameworks, practices, deployment offerings from the major cloud providers, and entire new paradigms. This is not just about getting new jobs, but also keeping your current one. You're expected by most employers to learn new things on a constant basis because the more you know, the more you benefit the corporation. You are given a couple of hours every week to learn new things and are provided access to learning platforms as part of your job. Those aren't freebies and your employer is not a charity. Your employer benefits from you becoming a better software engineer. Your employer sees an increase in their margins when you employ novel improved tools and ensures that their product offering isn't left behind in the market. Not learning new things is seen as a deficiency and will count against you in your performance reviews. In effect, just doing your job isn't enough. You have to keep up with and follow industry trends. However, It is also about getting a new job. No matter the market conditions, irregardless of how difficult testing for a new job is, it's pretty much always easier to make lateral moves in tech than it is to get promoted from within the company. Thus, it pays to keep up with the industry so you can move companies every couple years like most people would recommend. A lateral move is when you move to a different company instead of going upwards within your organization. The rest of my 9 to 5 advice is the same as advice I would give to any other corporate stooge. Be professional and be polite. Depending on your personality, be less of yourself. Look, this will probably be the most disheartening thing I'll say, but not every personality is a great fit for corporate work. Corporations posture about wanting interesting personalities and different points of view, but that's a lie. They want to not scare off overachievers. The vast majority of software development work is done at corporations, at companies that aspire to be corporations, or companies that behave like corporations. If you go down the path of freelance work, most freelance jobs are for corporations, and thus you will be expected to behave like a corporate worker. Corporations like Shopify, Squarespace, and all their alternatives have decimated the small client market for developers. Please don't get into software development thinking you'll become a maverick. Your tech industry heroes were all well-funded, lucky as heck, and exceptionally privileged. Most people who think they'll be flying supersonic jets end up flying commercial airliners. Most people who think they'll end up astronauts also end up flying airliners. Temper your expectations, because if you shoot for the moon, you will get valuable experience to put in your CV, which you'll need for when you apply to become a pilot for a commercial airliner. Here's some advice for CVs. If your uni is worth the dirt it's built on, they will teach you to use LaTeX. LaTeX is dead easy to learn for a software developer, and it produces much better results than Microsoft Word. LaTeX templates are easier to use and look much nicer than Word templates. Best of all, LaTeX is primarily meant to be compilable to PDF, which is the format you should always use for your CV. One last thing I would say about the 9 to 5 is that it is incredibly mentally taxing. Whether you are at a startup building components from scratch or at an established company trying to decipher tons of legacy code, software development is a mentally intensive job. The insane variety of problems you will be solving day to day means that you'll never be able to zone out, disassociate, or just enjoy the ride. A developer has to be focused, engaged, and able to use their mental capacity to the greatest possible extent on a regular basis in order to perform well. You have to keep up on top of your mental health while working as a software engineer, because if you don't, you'll crash and burn in a matter of months, if not weeks or days. Section 3. Outside the 9 to 5. For many software engineers, work doesn't end when they leave the office or turn off their work computer. This is the most disagreeable part of software engineering. If the section on interviewing got you to almost give up on your dreams of becoming a programmer, this definitely will finish the job. Remember how we talked about 3 ways that you are tested by recruiters so they can suss out your development skill? Well, they don't just use testing, they also like portfolios. A portfolio is a curated collection of your work that you can show employers alongside your CV. Portfolios aren't unique to software development. Most professional artists start theirs while they're still in high school. What is unique to software development is that you can't use samples from your day-to-day work in your portfolio. Unless you got hired to work on open source projects, your work at a tech company is the intellectual property of the company, not you. A portfolio in software development looks like this. It's just a GitHub profile. Ideally, it's an active one. You can see a profile's activity from the calendar, where brighter green means more activity. Look, a portfolio isn't mandatory, but it is for a solid 10 to 20% of all software development job applications. If you want one of those high-paying tech gigs that social media influencers lie about having, you need a great portfolio. Here's the 3 things that make for such a portfolio. A. Consistent activity. You want 3 to 4 days worth of green squares every week, as consistently as you can manage it. GitHub was built and is owned by Americans, so it doesn't take holidays or sick leave into account. B. Notoriety. There's an activity feed in your GitHub profile. Your portfolio looks better with contributions into open source projects. The holy grail is leading a project that others contribute into. C. Complexity. The projects in your GitHub don't need to be great or even useful, they only need to be as off-putting to the casual reader as possible. Not everyone who's clicked on your portfolio is going to do an in-depth read of your code to see if it's over-engineered. The easiest way to wow a visitor to your portfolio is complexity, so over-engineer with abandon. Obviously, you won't be directly paid for doing all this. It only potentially increases the chances of you getting a better job. If your employer gives a toss, they will let you use your personal GitHub account for their private instance, which cascades scanned details of private contributions to your public profile. I have yet to work at one such employer, which is why my activity graph looks dead when I'm actually employed and producing actual value to a company. It also flatlined after I got hit by a car in late August, but that's neither here nor there. Another thing you won't get paid for is more learning. As I mentioned before, every software engineering employer worth their oxygen will provide you with 1 or 2 hours of learning time every week, as well as access to learning platforms. I've had managers who ensured that I was using those resources productively. However, 1 or 2 hours per week aren't enough if you want to learn something substantial, and during periods of unemployment, you are expected to pick up the mantle yourself and teach yourself whatever paradigms are required for you to remain up to speed. If you learn something as part of a job, you can add that technology to the job's tech stack in your CV. Effectively, the position itself vouches for your knowledge, even if you didn't really get to use that area of tech too much. If you learn something on your own time and want to prove that you learned it, there's the wonderful world of accreditations. If you, for example, want to become proficient in Amazon Web Services, you go on the AWS learning platforms, where you'll find content that is half learning material, half indoctrination exercise about the virtues of AWS, and only sometimes free. At the end of the course, you'll pay $100 to Pearson, the official testing partner to AWS. For the sake of your wallet, you will pass the test after your first attempt. Number 4. Should you go to uni for software engineering? Yes. Okay, let me elaborate. Theoretically, software engineering is one of the few engineering professions that don't require accreditation, so you could self-train and get a job in the industry. Practically, trying to get into the industry while not having been to uni is for workaholic overachievers with loving rich parents. First off, you'll need boatloads of self-motivation and a support system that will bankroll you no matter what for 1 or 2 years. Not having a degree is not a deal breaker for recruiters, especially in tech, but it comes with other requirements. You'll need at least one wholly original software project that is production ready and gets traction in the open source community, or an eye-watering amount of contributions to major open source projects with immediately recognizable names. In order for either of those projects to materialize, you need to become self-taught in code versioning, collaboration practices, coding patterns, testing patterns, build patterns, deployment and deployment patterns before you even conceive the notion of starting on a worthwhile project or contributing to one. You need to do all of this on your own, with the help of courses you yourself seek out and whose teachers you internalize on your own. All while mommy and daddy are bankrolling you, or you're toiling at some dead-end customer service job that leaves you too tired to learn software development. There's a very high probability that you'll spend 1 or 2 years not doing enough to get to where you need to be, and or not learning or doing the right things for you to land an actual job. This is time that could be better spent doing a gap year, which is not a terrible idea given that you likely just spent a whole decade working 12-hour days and not taking weekends off. This isn't insurmountable. Plenty of people have gone down this path and have done very well for themselves, but those people are exceptionally driven or quite well off. If you have the opportunity to go to university, please go to university. Whether political or otherwise, don't fall for anti-university propaganda. Studying is not as politicized as malicious actors want you to think it is. Pundits in the Anglosphere have been claiming that universities have been taken over by the commies since the anti-Vietnam War protests. On the side of otherwise, uni is a great framework for learning that rests on 3 pillars: structure, accountability, and social pressure. Structure includes the courses you need to get your degree, the lesson plans for every course, and your day-to-day schedule. At uni, the things you need to learn are planned out by experts in your chosen field who are accountable not only to the university, but also to the government. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know if random people on the internet know enough to guide you. Accountability means there's always a bar you have to pass in order to advance. There's no slacking off, no scrolling through social media while a YouTube video runs in the background. You have to put in the effort regularly because someone is checking that you are. Social pressure comes from everyone around you. Your friends, your family, your professors, even the inherent nature of being a student will help you succeed. If you show up for class, you'll be in a gigantic room full of people who are there to learn, and no matter how much of a black sheep you think you are, you will feel the need to conform, and it will help you in the long run. No matter what, if you start uni, do your absolute best to not drop out. There is nothing worse for your career than dropping out of uni with nothing to show for your time there other than transfer credits. Health problems, bereavement leave, or a stint in the clink are all better options than being a uni dropout. By all means, if you have a good enough reason to drop out, then do it, but make sure you've got a great reason for it. You are not going to be the next rich prodigy dropping out to join a startup bankrolled by billionaires, so don't drop out for a business opportunity unless that business gives you a contract that forces them to give you a job after you graduate. You should only work for a company during your studies as long as that work doesn't jeopardize you getting your degree. At the very least, not having a degree leaves you vulnerable to market trends. If software development becomes non-viable by the time you've completed your studies, a computing science degree can get you into general office worker jobs. Being a self-taught tech maverick can only get you into tech jobs. Get a degree if you can. Very few people have the support system, tenacity, or frankly luck to get into the industry without one, and the risk of failure is too great. Oh, and just so I don't forget, boot camps are a sham. They are not free. You are signing away your future wages. There are two platitudes that are tossed around constantly. Do what you love and you won't work a day in your life, or turn what you love into work and you'll grow to despise it. Which platitude comes true depends on your outlook on life, and neither this video nor your career choice can affect that. There is always a chance that a profession might go downhill. If things turn bad, but you pursued a career doing something you love, you'll at least find solace in knowing you tried to succeed doing what you love. Now imagine that things turn bad for the career you chose based on what you thought would make you the richest when you graduated. Here's the kicker. Every profession goes through these cycles of good times and bad times. People deluded themselves into thinking that this wouldn't happen to software engineering, but then it did. Again, because it also happened in the dot-com bubble. Software engineering is not an easy career. Computer science is not an easy degree. Software engineering gigs are gate-kept by the hardest interviewing practices of any profession I know. Once you get a job, it is going to be a difficult one that will require you to stay on top of your mental state at all times. You will also be expected to produce the same type of work that you would typically get paid for outside of your 9 to 5. The money might come and go or even disappear forever, but the tough parts will remain, and it's those that will break you if you don't like software development. So do yourself a favor and only pursue software engineering if you actually like it. By it, I don't mean computers or assembling gaming PCs or modding video games or wasting your life away on Discord. I mean software engineering and all that entails. Well, I hope that was useful to at least someone. Oh, I forgot to add, if you have any further questions about this, add them in the comments. If they're easy to answer, I'll just answer in the comments. If you have more complicated stuff, I'll collate everything and answer them in a future video. I'm good for it, obviously. I mean, I made a whole freaking video out of something that one person said.